Nobody expected her to say it. Not like that. Not in a room full of cameras, reporters, and WTA officials sitting quietly in the back, watching every word. The Italian Open was winding down. The clay courts of Rome had done what they always do. They'd separated the pretenders from the players who truly belonged, and Alex had just shown the entire tennis world exactly which category she fell into. She was 20 years old, sitting behind a microphone in a press room that smelled like coffee and ambition, and she had every reason in the world to play it safe. Thank the sponsors. Mention the coaching staff. Talk about hard work and dedication and how grateful she was for the support of her country. That's the script. That's always the script. But Alex didn't read from it. She looked down at her hands for just a moment, then looked straight ahead, and said something that made the entire room go quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. Not awkward quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone says something so honest, so unexpectedly real, that your brain needs a second to catch up with what your ears just heard. And that moment, that single press conference in Rome, is what we're talking about today, because what she said didn't just make headlines. It rattled something inside an institution that has spent decades deciding how its young stars are supposed to behave. Before we get into what happened in that press room, you need to understand who Alex actually is, because if you reduce her to just a ranking or a flag or a feel-good story about a girl from the Philippines making it on the world stage, you're missing the whole picture. Alex grew up in a country that doesn't just support its athletes, it absorbs them. The Philippines has 110 million people and a deep, almost desperate hunger for someone to carry its flag onto the biggest stages in the world. When Manny Pacquiao was fighting, the streets went empty. Entire cities stopped moving. That's the weight that comes with being a Filipino champion. It's not just cheering. It's something closer to a national need. And Alex, from a very young age, became that person for an entirely new generation. She wasn't a boxer. She was a tennis player. A teenager with a racket and a game that looked like it had been built in a laboratory. Powerful baseline game, movement that seemed almost unfair for someone her age, and a competitive instinct that coaches spend careers trying to teach and rarely succeed. By the time she was 16, people were already talking about her the way they talk about generational talents. By 18, she was competing at the highest level. By 20, she had a ranking inside the top 40 and a name that presidents had mentioned in speeches. Actual presidents. Billionaires had gifted her things. Brands had lined up. The Philippine flag followed her to every tournament on the tour, held by fans who had flown thousands of miles just to be in the same building as her. That's the world she walks through every single day. Now picture yourself in that world. You're 20 years old. You've spent your entire life being told that you're special, that you represent something bigger than yourself, that every match you play matters not just for you but for an entire nation watching on screens at 3 in the morning because of the time difference. That's not pressure in the way most people use the word. That's something heavier. Something that can quietly hollow a person out if they let it. Most young players in that position do the same thing. They smile. They nod. They say all the right things. They absorb the weight because they're grateful and because they don't yet know how to put it down without feeling like they're letting someone down. Alex did something different. But let's not skip ahead. Let's talk about what she actually did in Rome first, because the press conference only hits as hard as it does when you understand what led up to it. The Italian Open had been remarkable for her. Not just good, remarkable. She opened her campaign with a win over Magdalena Frech, the world number 45, in a match that went 3 sets and tested everything she had. Frech is not an easy player. She's experienced, she's clay comfortable, and she makes you earn every single point. Alex earned it. Then came Wang Xinyu, seeded 31st in the tournament, a player known for her flat, aggressive ball striking that can take the racket right out of your hand on clay if you're not ready for it. Alex was ready. She handled her in straight sets, and the way she did it, efficiently, almost calmly, told you something about where her game was at that week. She wasn't surviving. She was performing. Then came the match that had Rome genuinely buzzing. Elena Rybakina, world number 2, one of the most dangerous servers in the women's game, a player who can end a rally so quickly that you feel like you barely participated in it. Alex played her in the 3rd round and pushed her to a 6-4, 6-3 scoreline that doesn't fully capture how competitive that match actually was. Rybakina won, yes, but there were moments in that match where the Foro Italico crowd, a crowd that knows tennis, that has watched the legends of the sport play on those courts, was holding its breath. Because Alex was right there. She was competing, she was moving, she was fighting on every single point, and even in losing, she showed something that rankings can't measure, that she belongs at that level. Her ranking climbed to 38 after Rome. She earned nearly 80,000 euros in prize money. She had played some of the best clay court tennis of her young career. By any measure, the tournament was a success. And then came the press conference. The questions came in order, the way they always do. How did you feel about your performance? What did you learn from the Rybakina match? How are you going to prepare for Roland Garros? Alex answered them all with a kind of thoughtful precision that makes journalists like her. She gives you something real, not just talking points. She talked about her improvement on clay, about the tactical adjustments her team had been working on, about her growing confidence on a surface that had historically given her trouble. And then a reporter from a major European outlet raised his hand. The question he asked was the question everyone in that room wanted the answer to. Alex, you're carrying the hopes of 110 million people. The flags follow you everywhere. The chants. The tears from fans. The expectations from an entire nation. How do you carry all of that? It's the kind of question that's almost unfair, because there's really no good answer to it. Say you love the support and you sound like you're reading from a press release. Say it's difficult and you risk headlines about how ungrateful you are. Most players navigate it by giving a non-answer, something warm and vague that sounds meaningful but says nothing. Alex paused. She looked down. And then she looked up. And she said it. The obligation, first and foremost, is to myself. It's my journey. I'm only 20, and I'm going to be the one who makes the decisions about my future. The reporters stopped. Not dramatically. Not in a movie way. They just stopped. Because those words didn't sound rehearsed. They didn't sound strategic. They sounded like something she had actually thought about. Something she believed. And then she kept going. Yes, of course, I want to give back as much as they give for me. But I play for myself first. Because if I'm not happy, if I'm not healthy, if I'm not playing for the right reasons, then I can't give anything to anyone else. Everyone talks about the pressure of carrying a nation. But I've learned that pressure is not something that's put on you. It's something you accept. And I've decided not to accept it. Not the way people think. The cameras were still rolling. The journalists were scribbling. And in the back of the room, the WTA officials were doing something that officials in back rooms at press conferences almost never do. They were paying close attention. Here's why that matters. The WTA, the governing body of women's tennis, has spent decades building a product. And part of building that product involves managing how its players are perceived. Who gets pushed as the next big thing? Whose story gets told and how? Which young players become faces of the sport and which ones remain, despite their talent, on the margins of the conversation. They've become very good at identifying a certain type of young star, grateful, eager, willing to be shaped, willing to smile for the cameras and say the right things at the right moments. And for a long time, the system worked. Players played along because they were told it was in their best interest. Because the alternative, pushing back, drawing lines, refusing the script, felt risky. Alex just made it feel like the only option worth considering. What she said in Rome wasn't a manifesto. It wasn't a calculated media move. It was just honesty. But honesty, in a sport that has sometimes confused vulnerability with weakness and compliance with professionalism, can land like a grenade. And the reaction proved it. Within hours of the press conference, the clips were everywhere. The hashtag #AlexSpeaks started trending worldwide. Not just in the Philippines, worldwide. And the responses told you everything about how starved people were for exactly this kind of moment. Fans wrote things like she's never pretended to be something she's not, that's exactly why we love her. Other comments said finally, a young athlete who isn't afraid to say I come first. And one that kept getting shared over and over again said the WTA wants puppets, Alex is not a puppet, and that's why she's going to be a champion. Philippine media ran with it immediately. The headlines weren't defensive or concerned. They were proud. The Filipina star refuses to be defined by expectations. That was one of them. And the pride made sense, because what Alex said wasn't a rejection of her country. It was actually a form of love, the kind that requires enough self-awareness to understand that you can only give what you actually have, and that running yourself into the ground to meet expectations you never agreed to isn't devotion. It's self-destruction dressed up as loyalty. The reaction from other players in the sport was what made the moment feel genuinely significant. Naomi Osaka posted a message that was simple and direct. Proud of you, this takes courage. Coming from Osaka, who famously stepped away from the sport at the peak of her powers to protect her own mental health, who sat in front of cameras and told the world that she was struggling, that meant something specific. It wasn't just an encouraging comment from a fan. It was recognition from someone who understood exactly what it costs to say that in public. Coco Gauff, who has navigated her own version of this, the prodigy label, the weight of expectations, the endless comparisons to players who came before her, wrote set those boundaries early, it only gets harder if you don't. And Billie Jean King, a woman who has spent her entire life fighting for the idea that players in women's tennis deserve to be treated as full human beings and not just entertainers, weighed in with players should always come first. Alex understands that. She's leading the way for the next generation. Let's slow down and really sit with what Alex was actually saying, because it's worth more than a headline. There's a story that gets told about athletes from developing nations, particularly young female athletes, and it goes something like this: you should be grateful. Grateful for the opportunity. Grateful for the platform. Grateful for the sponsors who believed in you, the federation that supported you, the fans who showed up. Be grateful, and show that gratitude by giving everything, your time, your energy, your mental health, your sense of self, to the cause. It's a story that sounds generous on the surface. It sounds like it's about giving back. But when you look at it closely, it's actually asking the athlete to disappear. To stop being a person with needs and limits and a life outside of what they can produce for others, and to become instead a vessel for national pride. And what happens when you ask that of someone who is 20 years old and still figuring out who they are? You get burnout. You get athletes who quietly fall apart while publicly performing wellness. You get careers cut short not by injury but by exhaustion, by the slow suffocation of carrying too much for too long without anyone ever asking how they're actually doing. Alex has clearly spent time thinking about this. I play for myself first, she said, because if I'm not happy, if I'm not healthy, if I'm not playing for the right reasons, then I can't give anything to anyone else. That sentence isn't selfishness. That sentence is the kind of wisdom that most people don't find until they've already lost something important. Their health, their joy, their love for the thing they've spent their whole life building. She found it at 20. In a sport that has spent years watching its young stars burn bright and then burn out, that's not just admirable. It's almost radical. One commentator put it this way: most players take decades to learn what Alex already knows, that you can't pour from an empty cup. And that's exactly right. The players who have the longest, most meaningful careers in tennis, the ones who don't just have a few brilliant years but who sustain themselves at the highest level across a decade or more, are almost always the ones who learned early that the sport is a marathon, not a sprint. That protecting your own well-being isn't a detour from the journey. It is the journey. What Alex is doing, by saying this out loud at 20, by drawing that line in public and refusing to be ashamed of it, is something that will ripple outward in ways that are hard to fully measure right now. Because every young player from a country where the weight of expectation is enormous, and there are more of them than people realize, just watched someone their age walk into a press room and refuse to shrink. Refuse to apologize for having needs. Refuse to accept a version of her own story that was written by someone else. That matters. It matters to the 17-year-old in Manila who wants to pick up a tennis racket but worries about what it means to represent her country before she's ready. It matters to the 19-year-old in Lagos or Jakarta or Lima who is talented enough to compete at the highest level but has been told in 100 subtle ways that her job is to perform for others, not to grow for herself. Alex just told all of them something different. And she didn't do it through a carefully worded press release or a sponsored post. She did it in the middle of a real moment, with cameras in her face, when it would have been so much easier to just say what people wanted to hear. Now let's talk about what comes next, because this is where it gets interesting. The French Open was on the horizon when she made that statement in Rome. Roland Garros, the most prestigious clay court tournament in the world, the place where reputations are made on red dirt and afternoon shadows, where the greatest players in history have had some of their defining moments. Alex was going there with a ranking inside the top 40, fresh off her best clay court campaign, with the kind of momentum that coaches dream about building at exactly this point in a season. She was also going there having just drawn a very public line about who she is and what she will and won't accept. And that line is going to follow her into every press conference, every courtside interview, every interaction with the WTA's marketing machinery for the foreseeable future. Because what you say in moments like that doesn't disappear. It defines you. The question is whether it defines you in the way you intended, or whether the machine finds a way to reshape it into something else, into a narrative about difficulty, about an athlete who is hard to work with, about someone who doesn't understand the responsibilities that come with her platform.